Imagine this. Inflation has finally dropped to 2.7%, a number that looks decent on paper. Politicians should be celebrating, markets should be breathing easier, and households should be feeling relief. But instead, a wave of panic is rippling through the Republican Party. Why? Because despite the statistics, the ground reality for millions of Americans tells a very different story. Prices of essentials like food, housing, and medicine are still painfully high, and that reality is hitting voters harder than any graph or data point. Even President Trump's strongest supporters, the ones who stood by him through thick and thin, are starting to feel uneasy. Inflation is one of the most powerful political weapons in American history. It doesn't matter if the stock market is booming, or if GDP growth is ticking upward. If people feel their daily lives are getting more expensive, they blame the government. Under Trump, the economic narrative has been complicated. On one hand, he boasts about job creation, deregulation, and America First trade policies. On the other hand, the legacy of inflation is now becoming a political storm that his party cannot ignore. Even though the official inflation rate has cooled down, what really matters to the average voter is the price of eggs, milk, rent, and hospital bills. And in that department, Americans are still hurting. This is where the Republican panic begins. Trump has always sold himself as a deal maker, a businessman who understands money better than the so-called career politicians in Washington. But when core Republican voters, middle-class families, small business owners, retirees on fixed incomes, walk into grocery stores and see prices that are double what they were a few years ago, the businessman image starts to crack. Republicans know that if inflation continues to dominate dinner table conversations, Trump's re-election chances could take a serious hit. Republican strategists are caught in a trap. If they defend Trump's record too aggressively, they risk looking out of touch with the daily struggles of voters. But if they criticize him, they risk alienating Trump himself and his loyal base, which could fracture the party ahead of 2024. This internal tension is creating what many analysts are calling Republican panic, a fear that inflation could become the Achilles heel of Trump's campaign. For most Americans, economic statistics don't matter as much as lived experience. You can tell voters that inflation has dropped from 9% to 7%. But if their grocery bill is still 30% higher than it was before the pandemic, they won't feel relief. They'll feel cheated. They'll believe politicians are playing with numbers while ignoring real suffering. This disconnect between official data and public perception is exactly what's fueling voter frustration. Republicans are watching this frustration grow like a ticking time bomb. Voters who once chanted, "Make America Great Again," are now quietly asking, if Trump is such a great deal maker, why does everything still cost so much? That kind of doubt is dangerous, not because it means people will suddenly vote Democrat, but because it means many Republicans might simply stay home on election day. And in a close race, even a small drop in turnout could change everything. Inflation has always been a political vulnerability for incumbents, and Trump is no exception. Back in the 1970s, President Jimmy Carter's image was destroyed by inflation, even though many of the causes were outside his control. Today, Trump risks facing a similar perception problem. Republicans know history, and they fear a repeat. Democrats, of course, are not missing the opportunity. They're framing Trump as all talk, no results, a president who promises economic relief but leaves working families behind. Attack ads highlight rising costs of prescription drugs, unaffordable housing, and groceries. And with each of these ads, Republicans feel the walls closing in. Behind closed doors, Republican consultants are urging the Trump campaign to shift strategy. Some suggest blaming global supply chains, China, or even the Federal Reserve. Others want Trump to double down on his narrative of being an outsider fighting against the deep state that controls the economy. But here's the problem. Voters don't care about complicated explanations. They care about whether they can afford dinner for their kids tonight. And until Trump finds a way to address that kitchen table reality, the panic within his party will only grow louder. So, where does this leave Trump and the Republican Party? On one hand, they can point to the cooling inflation rate as proof that the economy is stabilizing. On the other hand, they can't escape the brutal truth that prices remain stubbornly high for essentials. Voter frustration is real, and political vulnerability is spreading.